all for joining. I hope everyone had a good time at the Getty Center last night. Really pleased to present a friend and impressive entrepreneur, Kevin. I don't know, is this your first time here, Kevin?
It's my first time here. We were here last year.
Yeah, Dan was here last year and got to know what's going on here at Hive, and just been just personally exceptionally excited by what you're building. I think the first thing, I'd like to see how many of you all ever have seen the TV show Silicon Valley? All right, that's a lot. So maybe we start there.
Let's start there, sure.
There's an origin story here we're going to talk about.
Right.
So.
Well, thanks for having us
Thank you.
this year. I'm excited to share some more of our stories. So my name is Kevin. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Hive. As Wes so eloquently alluded to, indeed, our origin stories are tied, somewhat surprisingly, with the show Silicon Valley. So if you kind of take us, this is like season 3, I think episode 4, there's a famous like hot dog, not hot dog story arc in that show. Believe it or not, that was actually based on us. So we are the real life inspiration for that story. So let me explain. My background is...
It's a little early to explain.
Yeah, well, we'll go into it. So I met my co-founder, Dimitri, back when we were both students at Stanford. Did undergraduate and graduate studies there in computer science, studying AI, back when AI was not nearly as exciting as it is now. And both of us had seen our advisor actually leave Stanford to join a company. We thought, well, if our advisor is leaving, why are we still here? We ended up dropping out, started our own company. And we actually started off by building a video chat product, peer-to-peer, on mobile. This is where, if you've seen the show, you may remember this Piper Chat app. That's very similar. So we had this app, it went viral. We were living the dream, small group of engineers, millions of users, raised a bunch of venture capital. But then we ran into an issue. With such a large scale of users, and it was semi-anonymous and on video, some bad actors started to emerge, exhibiting behavior that's called the hot dog problem, right? And this was like 2015, 2016. Around that time, we tried open source models to detect these kind of instances. We tried paid models that Google just released. Surprisingly, they were all terrible. Around that time, we had already seen self-driving cars in the strip, so we thought, how could this be? Like, if we have self-driving cars, how can the hot dog problem be so difficult to solve? But it was indeed not available, so we ended up, one fateful weekend, I essentially told my co-founder, I said, I can't believe this, but we have to do this on our own. So we ended up hand labeling, I did this personally, the first set of data, 50,000 images, hot dog, not hot dog, binary class, labeled this, and then built that model. Our engineers thought it was quite amusing that the CEO was talking about hot dogs for those few days. They told their friends at other companies. Those CEOs of other similar consumer startups, they kind of know me. They said, hey, look, Kevin, this is really funny, but we actually all have this problem. Can we buy this model from you? And so then we started this almost a side hustle of selling this API just for really one class, hot dog detection initially. And then, of course, as we added in more models for ourselves, general, nudity, and violence and gore, and hate speech, and spam, and all of this, kept adding classes. Other customers kept onboarding, and that's how we became what is now Hive. But if you watch the show, similar story arc. They had this Piper Chat app. Jen Yang in the show builds the hot dog app, which then in the show gets acquired by Periscope. That obviously is dramatized and happen here, but they indeed base it off of us. So that's a little small tidbit. So today, how we describe our business is we're obviously far more than just hot dog detection. But you've
upsold the kielbasa.
But it gives you an idea of how we've started. I think compared to a lot of these other, let's call it more research-based AI companies. Their goal now is broadly to do things like bring about AGI. I think we're on the other side of the spectrum, which is very much on the applied sense. We started this to solve our own problems, and now we build models to solve a broad set of problems that our customers tell us, right? And so we're very much focused on building technology that is the right fit for the kind of high priority issues that we see today.
What are the biggest issues that you're seeing? I mean, you start with moderation as obviously a clear umbrella, but there's also the authenticity story.
Sure.
Of what content's actually authentic versus what's fake.
Yeah. So just broadly, how do we describe our business now? From our humble origins of just building the hot dog model, we are a broad cloud provider of AI models. So today we process tens of billions of pieces of content every month from hundreds of platforms. They basically view us the same way that they would view a service like Google Cloud or Amazon Services, but specifically for a wide range of deep learning models. So we can kind of bucket our solutions into 3 groups. There's models that understand. This includes things like our early models. There's models that search, which take in large corpuses of data and kind of be able to filter through and look for specific instances. We have both our own indexes as well as custom-provided indexes. And then finally, our own generative models too. So fairly broad. The intent is to go end-to-end. And really be a one-stop shop. Our philosophy is that we want to be our customers' primary cloud provider of AI models. We don't want them to go to us for a portion of their workload, but then still go back to Google or Amazon or even OpenAI for another. We want them to keep them on Hive for everything related to AI, and that's been working really well so far. And so if you think about the primary kind of use cases, it's really around you're a customer that has a huge amount of content. How do you better do those functions, understand search, and ultimately generate on top of that? Our target base tends to be a lot of technology companies. So some ones like I mentioned, for instance, Reddit was one of our oldest customers. We have been a long-term partner of them. We help them understand huge amounts of their content. We work with media companies as well, like NBCU and Netflix. So folks that have a lot of just raw content that maybe they would be building models to run internally, they would need to understand, or ones that maybe they would need to hire large amounts of humans behind the scenes in kind of the old days of how they would work on that. Now, one of the things that you brought up, which is really interesting, is in terms of kind of novel use cases that have come up recently, the whole wave of generative AI, I think a lot of people look at it right now, it's more the focus is on the kind of the chatbot side, right? We see a lot of these LLM companies coming up, you see a lot of applications being talked about. But there is another aspect of this which was more popular last year, which is kind of, I guess, faded a little bit behind the scenes, but I actually think is more of a pressing issue, which is around, it's called like general content creation, especially with multimedia aspects, right? Okay. So creating images, video, audio, whether it's AI generated or deepfakes, the ease with which these tools are now available to just anyone to use and how this can proliferate online. We've seen a massive increase in this for the last few months. And from our perspective, we're in a very unique situation to help solve that, right? So speaking more specifically, one of the things that we released in the last few months that we're really excited about that we want to share here is we've actually produced a set of models, AI models on their own that can kind of almost be adversarial against these generative models. They can detect whether or not content is AI generated and can even tell you which engine made it. Now this may seem counterintuitive at first, but the reality is these generative models themselves, they're not truly random. They all have a certain signal beneath the surface. This is how they're designed. It's maybe naked to the human eye, but if you see enough of this data and you know how the math works, you can build models that detect this. And in our situation, we're uniquely situated because it turns out we actually work with a lot of these generative AI companies as well as our customers. So we've gotten to know and understand how this content works, how it looks and feels, and we've now been able to roll out this set of products as well.
Does that help on the copyright, some of the copyright issues, or will that be something you could help solve?
Yeah, so there are a few ways that this manifests, I think. The first is that there is a dramatic uptick in concern over this now, especially with the pending elections. You may remember this 4 years ago, but there were a lot of concern around, it's called outside bad actors coming in and maybe influencing elections. The ability to now do this, if you can essentially imagine you can programmatically generate endless amounts of content gearing a certain message. It's just, you can imagine flooding networks with this. And so I think the first people that are really concerned with this are going to be the publishers, the ad networks, the ones that are serving these ads. And you may have seen some of these initiatives they put forth in recent months talking about maybe putting watermarks in or trying to come up with like a certain metadata standard that will flag things as AI generated. All of that, in our view, is kind of a temporary stopgap, and it frankly requires the opt-in and kind of almost the agreement of the users to say, I will be a good actor and do this. For instance, like metadata, you can add in a metadata all you want in the file, but if a user goes in and changes it, they get rid of it, it's not there anymore, right? So what we think is going to have to happen here, instead of these kind of Band-Aid solutions, is you really need a standard where models like ours are going to be run in real time across all this content, produce actual insights on this that cannot be modified by the user themselves, surface that to the ad network, which will eventually use that to either screen things out or potentially even surface it to the user. This is where it's going to go, right? When we think about things like copyright, I mean, it's somewhat related, right? The ability to say, okay, given an image, what does it contain? Like, you don't necessarily, for instance, like, we've seen, it's not exactly copyright, but it's relevant. There are some famous examples of celebrities like Taylor Swift who got heavily stylized and put in terrible positions in social media. These are things that if you actually had models that could run in real time and say, for instance, a few things. One, does this picture contain someone like Taylor Swift? Two, does it contain any graphic content like nudity or violence? Three, is it AI generated? If all those things hit, right, it's pretty easy to stop in real time. And reality is all of our models can do this today, immediately, right? And so that's what we're working on now is, the real question is, how do we get our models in the hands of as many of these platforms as possible to really stop this from happening in real time, behind the scenes, before it gets out to the world. Because once it's out, it's very hard to stop. But you can actually stop it at the source.
It's fraud detection, real-time fraud detection, it sounds like.
Yeah, fraud. I mean, I think it's in general.
Fraudulent.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the things that we've learned a lot about human nature over the years, given our own experience building apps, is in general, when new technology comes out, it's definitely very exciting, and there's a lot of good things that can happen. But I think the first things you'll probably see that are impactful are actually more of the negatives, right? It's just what it is, because bad actors tend to have more outsized impact. They tend to produce things that are more controversial. I remember one of the first set of images that came out when DALL-E 2 and Stable Diffusion were announced were images of like the Pentagon blowing up, right? And that went viral. And then I think at one point, stock market, even like a lot of trading bots had viewed that this is before they understood what was going on, and they had a momentary flash crash, right? Things like this are just, that's what you're going to see more of, rather than the flip side, which is, oh, like look at this really beautiful advertisement that was AI generated. That may be true, but no one cares, right? So I think you're always going to see more of the negatives having more just outsized impact, and that's why I think it's very important that we, as a community, everyone who's involved in the content creation and consumption and distribution, they need to go beyond just citing these like soft accords, saying that this is an important problem, but actually implement technology to do so, right? And that's what we've been working a lot. I think in recent months, our models on that front have gotten significantly better, and we're hopeful that this will be rolled out. I mean, it already is. A number of these publishers have already started to add our models in this manner, but we view our objective as getting to pretty much 100% coverage.
Well, I think the model accuracy is just like our old business before joining March. I mean, it's all about model accuracy, and I think by focusing on this as a specialty, your models are much better than those that are provided by the hyperscalers, and I think that matters too. This requires the specialty that you bring to it.
Yeah, that's a good point, and kind of touch on that a little more. I think there's AI these days, I think, is viewed synonymously oftentimes with generative models, and I understand why that's the case, but in reality, AI as a bucket is far broader, and I would actually kind of separate into two camps. There's these generative models, but then there's a bigger set of, it's called more battle-tested and proven-out models, what I would call predictive models, right? Which is given a piece of content or a question, give you a precise answer. We've built our business on the backs of building some of the best predictive models in the world, right? So given a piece of content for a specific question, whatever the question is there explicit content, or transcribe the text, or identify the age of the person. These are all things with concrete answers, with measurable precision, and that's where we do an exceptional job. It may not be as flashy, be able to generate like a whole essay or write on whatever topic, or generate code as you wish, but it turns out that even a lot of these, so there's two types of companies that I think people will oftentimes compare us against, right? The first is actually these generative companies themselves. So they'd ask us like, why couldn't a company like OpenAI or any of these other Gen AI companies just have these models do this function as a part of their capability? Probably the best way I can answer this is, I think I alluded to this, but a lot of these Gen AI companies are actually our customers. If you look at companies like Midjourney and Runway ML and Ideogram, a lot of these well-funded and well-known Gen AI startups, believe it or not, they actually use our models and build on top of us because this is outside of their skill set. These models are completely different. They may be able to generate beautiful images and create videos in a way that weren't possible before, but they don't actually have the ability to reliably and accurately understand the prompts that people are putting in, to moderate their content, to do all these, let's call it more predictive tasks that their models simply aren't suitable for, right? If you have a Gen AI model that has an accuracy of, let's call it 95%, maybe that's okay for a lot of creative tasks, because if you're a user, you can go and modify, and the essay has some typos, whatever, I can deal with it. But if you're an enterprise and you're looking to make sure that you can, with basically 100% precision, take action on content and not involve humans at all, it's not going to work if you have that error rate, right? And then so the other camp of folks are these hyperscalers like Google, Amazon, Microsoft. I would say that's really who we compete with more directly day to day. And they've had these models for years. Even before we started, they had these models, right? When we were building our own hot dog model, it wasn't like we wanted to build it. We had to, because the options available from these public clouds weren't very good. And I think that's still true today. The reality is they have these models, they're there, but the precision, again, the performance of how they will operate, again, it's measurable, and it's vast, the difference, right? We're talking, again, an order of magnitude or more of kind of measurable difference in our model quality. And so that, I think, is something that, is not something you can really just build overnight and throw a lot of money at. I think that's the other thing I'll mention is a lot of these Gen AI companies, with enough compute and enough raw data, you can kind of quickly make up ground and build like a good LLM. But these predictive models are a bit of a different beast. It's not raw unstructured data. It's not even compute bound. It's more like data set bound, curated data bound, like understanding what customers need, putting the right classes in, doing those iterative feedback loops. We release new model versions every 4 to 6 weeks with taking in feedback from all of our hundreds of customers. This is something that you cannot necessarily buy with money. It really takes a lot of time to do. And I think this is part of the reasons why these models are so hard to replicate. It's just a very different domain.
I think about, the poor humans that, 40,000 at some of these companies that have to look at some of the most depraved things humanity can create and put in videos, live videos, and try to take down in time before other people see it. You're solving that. You're saving those people that exposure to that, but you're also helping the broader ecosystem, before they get served up. And I think that's something that most people don't really understand what you're doing in that regard. I think the public service of that alone is important, because particularly with nation states, I think we're going to see more of that happening in the next 12 months with this election cycle too, which is destabilizing. So I think you're coming in at the right time on this.
Yeah, there's a strong irony, I think, in the tech industry, which is a lot of the largest tech companies, like this is well known, like Meta, for instance. Obviously, they're a leader in generative AI now, releasing a lot of open source technology, but they're still the largest employer of third-party content moderators.
Yeah.
They've at this point probably 50,000 plus humans behind the scenes monitoring content. And if you think about it, right, there are a number of issues there, but the real question is, well, why can't you just have an AI model do a lot of this? Do you really need a person sitting there being exposed to extreme graphic content, or even looking for things like misinformation or deepfakes, because models can just do this better? And I think part of the problem there is, and this goes back to what I was saying previously, Meta is not dumb. They're obviously very intelligent. They're at the forefront of this.
Yep.
They actually would say that they are more confident releasing best-in-class open source generative models than putting their own predictive models into production for critical use cases like moderation, because they have their own fears about how accurate the model can be. But they know from the generative world, the bar is just lower, right? If they just release a really big model with the most parameters, it's open source, it doesn't really matter how accurate it is. People will build upon it and they'll extend it, and it's low risk. The risk for them is if they put in a bad model in their workflows, and either bad content gets through or they incorrectly screen out too much good content, that could massively impact their revenue potentially, right? And so that's why they're much more risk adverse. That's also why I think third parties like ours are important, because we're able to operate in a much more focused manner on these problems. Rather than these other companies, they're always worried about how it affects bottom line and stock prices and all of this. Our objective is just to build the best models in the world. And over time, we found that these partners will, even if they start off being a little more stubborn or reluctant to use third-party tech, they'll come around when they just see how performant our models can be, right? And part of it just comes down to, again, the exposure to a wide range of data and interactions and adversaries. If you're Meta, yeah, you're one of the biggest companies in the world and you operate, a few of our large properties, but you're still just one company. I think our advantage here is that we work with hundreds of platforms. Collectively, their reach is significantly larger than that of Meta. And more importantly, it's very diverse, right? So when we see our models being used across all these different platforms and we see all the different ways these bad actors are trying to circumvent them, we can take those insights, improve it for the whole group, right? And so our kind of key insight here has been, because of how we're positioned now at kind of as this centerpiece of this ecosystem in many ways for a lot of these platforms, we'll always be able to build better models than what any individual platform can build, simply by virtue of the fact that we have more data and understanding now.
Yeah. I think X has tried with the community notes. That seems to be the human version of this, but I would imagine at some point you could power that with AI and complement what humans.
Yeah. So this is always the kind of I guess there's always the this is the trap a lot of people fall into. All these platforms will view couldn't we just self-moderate, right? Reddit famously did this with their subreddits, but I'll just mention, of course, that Reddit has been one of our long-term customers. Even them, right, the poster child of community moderation, they realized early that it's not going to work on its own. You need to supplement that with other procedures. And before us, their procedure was, let's bring in our own managed third-party human workforce to then moderate the moderator's work, right? Things like X, you see the same thing. The community notes are an interesting concept, but the accuracy of those notes, the quality of them, a lot of issues there too, right? And so I think exactly to your point, I mean, all these platforms will need augmentation with a heavy set of models on top.
think Wikipedia should be next.
Yeah, same thing. Believe it or not, we've actually talked to them as well. We've looked at this.
Controversial.
Yeah, the reality is anywhere there's content, you're going to find bad actors, right?
Exactly.
For me personally, one of the more surprising ones, as we worked with like one of these big box retailers, they have reviews that people put on, and they can upload photos of images, and you'd be surprised at the explicit nature and the profane nature and the spam that even this retailer gets, right? And anytime there's a way that you can interact with the world, I think bad actors will find a way to come in and kind of put themselves in that position to create some of this content.
Or a very good friend of mine with a dark sense of humor, who's a comedian, likes to do that as a hobby, to see what he can get away with. In the remaining few minutes, I mean, you've been at this your whole career. What's happening in this AI, a lot of what we're talking about. Where do you feel like we're at in this process? I mean, is this overhype mode now, or is this underhype mode, or this is transformational? What's your take? I know you're sitting in Seattle and San Francisco and looking at the space.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting to see the cyclical nature of technology and the hype cycles. Probably I'll sum up this way is I remember between 2016 and 2021, let's say, I mean, we heard about self-driving cars all the time. There were dozens of these companies. Every few months, there were bold proclamations made about what happened there, and then kind of just went away. You saw a few high-profile failures as well, both in the public and private markets. But then just the other day, right, I was in one of these Waymo cars in San Francisco, and it worked really well, right? I mean, the thing, it basically just, I think it's kind of there, especially in city driving. But what's ironic is that you don't hear much about it, right? So there's almost this like, there's a correlation here that goes against what you expect is when technology, like it's both fast and slow compared to what you would expect, right? And I think it's oftentimes not linked to what you see in the media or what's hyped up. But progress takes time. In the case of self-driving cars, it took a lot longer than we would expect, right? I mean, people would, again, back to our hot dog story, we thought that when we saw that demo in CES in 2016, we thought, okay, self-driving cars should be on the road by like 2020. Yeah. Here we're in 2024, it's finally now rolling out. Things just take always 5 to 10 years longer than you expect. I think we're probably something similar now in this generative AI wave. I think it's no doubt that it's going to be really impactful technology. I think it's kind of, I think it's going to follow a similar path potentially to self-driving cars, in that there's going to be a lot of players and a lot of excitement, but to find true commercial value and to find products that will actually get to that quality bar necessary to permeate, real-world applications, it's going to take time.
There'll be some accidents, high-profile
some accidents, and in many ways, it's actually an even harder problem than self-driving cars, because that one, I think it's more measurable. It's more like a predictive model in many ways. So I think it's easier in some ways it's easier to build a high accuracy model. The problem with generative models is how they're built. There may be architectural limits to how they operate in this current state that would prevent it from having this kind of broader adoption in any case. So it may require just fundamental paradigm shifts too. So we'll see. But overall, of course, this is the way the world's going to go, right? Like we've always believed in the kind of the macro trend of a lot of human work should be automated, right? Whether it's driving a car or being a content moderator or transcribing audio or being a customer support chat agent, at minimum, you need to kind of have that co-pilot interaction where you can make a human much more productive. And I think we understand the potential now. We're seeing some glimpses of this, and so it's exciting. And we believe that in the next 10 to 20 years, in that time frame at least, that we can say that AI is going to be involved in everything we do in our day-to-day lives, and I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of value built by these companies that are doing so.
I agree. And visionaries like you that are making that happen, and the team you've been able to assemble can create and spin up these AI solutions at remarkable speed. So thank you for coming. We're really great to have you here, and hope to see you next year.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.